My pleasure to introduce to you somebody who's in New Zealand as a guest of the Free Speech Union, Dr. James Lindsay. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
In terms of your the response, the reaction from people in New Zealand, I mean, I think you're self-described as a professional troublemaker. Perhaps you're used to it by now in terms of the way in which people have responded?
There's two ways people have responded. There's the way they respond online and by phone call, where they are going around and shutting down our venues, which leads us to get a newer, bigger venue and put more people in the room. And then there's the way that they respond when I'm actually there with them in person, which is extremely warm and welcoming, giving me the Kiwi best. It seems I feel very at home. I feel very well treated. So there's the typical divide online and in real life.
I mean, is that part of the problem here? Because, I mean, not wanting to get too pointed, but you seem like a much nicer person even on a Zoom call. Whereas when we hit Twitter, I mean, we can have a different persona and make all sorts of harsh comments. Perhaps our online avatar is different from who we are when you get to know us.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and the space itself matters. I don't want to sound like Marshall McLuhan and say the medium is the message, but the fact is that Twitter structurally has some real issues for communication. One is that virtually everything you post on Twitter is out of context to most of the people who see it. So you have a huge communicative barrier there. And another is that blatantly it's become true that the social media space, and maybe X or Twitter most of all, is a battle space. It is a battlefield, and you would not act the same way on a physical battlefield with, men running around with guns and bombs as you would act in everyday life. And the same thing's true on Twitter. It's a little bit, it's a psychological battlefield, but it's a battlefield nonetheless. So people behave differently. But yeah, when you sit down and talk to people face to face, even people you disagree with, it turns out you find a lot of common ground. You have a lot of common humanity, and it's a much more productive uh, avenue for connecting as people.
There seems to be increasing divisions in society with different people who have strong views and opinions on a range of different topics. When it comes to the causal factor for this, is it the topics themselves or is it the medium? Is social media to blame for some of our cultural and social divide?
I think it's both of those things, actually. And in addition, a third thing, which is that social media has opened up a door to a type of, and I mean this in the least tinfoil hat way possible. There's evidence supporting this that we could go into, but influence campaigns. So
Yeah.
whether it's just somebody who's wanting to hire somebody to put messages on social media for, a few dollars per post or tweet, that's one thing. Or if it's foreign governments creating bot networks, that's another. We just saw in the United States a scandal. It was called the Tenet Media scandal, where an alternative media channel called Tenet Media was proved by our Department of Justice to have been created with by a Russian influence group using $10 million of Russian money with the specific intention of funneling that money down to media partners who are everyday podcasters and X users with the explicit intention of sowing division in the conservative movement and MAGA. So none of these people who were participating in it even knew that's where the money was coming from or what it was intended for.
And this is, as you say, this is a bit of a battlefield. And in terms of people with nefarious purposes, a lot of damage can be done to a culture, to a society, to a democracy through foreign agents working in this regard. It does seem a little bit like, though, that's an easy thing to blame. It kind of has that same sort of reds under the bed feeling that all of our problems in society, well, this must be Russian bot armies or foreign agents who are ruining our society. Honestly, I think we're doing a pretty good job of ruining our society without having to blame the bots.
Yeah, I do. I do too. There's been infiltration into our institutions. with extremist ideas on one side, and that usually requires or engenders, maybe it doesn't require, but engenders extremist responses on other sides. And I didn't say the other side, I said other sides in the plural. Extremism tends to beget extremism because it's hard to deal with extremists. And so we are doing that. I do think, at least maybe not here. I don't know what's happening with your conversation for sure in New Zealand, but in the United States, it's my impression that people are underestimating how much of this is foreign influence. The Chinese CCP, for example, I recently learned is spending $16 billion US per year on influence campaign social media to attack Western nations. So when you hear a number like that, you have to realize that there's a great deal more of it happening. And what I run into day to day is people thinking it's, these are just other people living in their basement or whatever else
Yeah.
saying absurd things online.
And hey, it's something that shutting down TikTok isn't necessarily going to help. It doesn't. Those social media networks don't have to be controlled by foreign powers to be influenced by them.
That's right. That's exactly right.
When it comes to I suppose the social divide, and quite rightly, you said there's a range of different people with strong opinions on this one, but I suppose one of the big things that's happening in the United States and is happening globally as well is a pushback on what some people describe as wokeism. How would you describe that? How would you define that?
Well, you're talking to the right guy. I think it's a very weird thing to say this sentence. I might be the world's leading expert on woke or
Yep.
wokeism
Mm-hmm.
as a philosophy. Jonathan from the Free Speech Union has been introducing me at these events, being very particular. And he didn't realize it before sitting down and talking with me and hearing me speak here in New Zealand this week, that I am very precise in what I mean by this word, that
Yep.
I've really done the work. And it's saying that there's a variety of ways we can conceptualize it, but the technical way would be that you've adopted critical theory
Mm-hmm.
as the basis for how you do your analysis. A critical theory comes from the Frankfurt School of what's called critical Marxism or cultural Marxism, if you'd rather. So it's a Marxist analysis of society and culture. It's based in the idea that the society itself is all rigged to support capitalism and capitalist related ideologies, and that this prevents there from being a change to socialism, and that you have to pick apart at cultural values as opposed to, say, economic concerns in order to try to overthrow the existing system and open the door to a new system.
Mm.
Rather than violent revolution, it looks for cultural revolution, like Mao Zedong did in China in the 1960s. In fact, Herbert Marcuse modeled his critical theory off of Mao Zedong in China from the 1960s. And he said he did so. This isn't hypothetical. He
Yeah.
said so. So woke means having woke up to believing that society is organized in an oppressor versus oppressed intrinsic conflict, and that conflict has to play out in order to overcome oppression. And so what it generates is conflict as a means of gaining power so that the people who are allegedly on the morally right side of the conflict, when they take power, can end the oppression.
Fantastic explanation of it. Part of the challenge, though, is in the definitions. That woke is also used as a weapon to hit people with. One group gets called woke, the other group gets called fascists, and the term isn't used precisely as often as perhaps it should be. Is that part of the problem, Dr. Lindsay?
Yeah, that's certainly part of the problem, and it has a really sinister consequence, which it debases those terms.
Yep.
In addition to obviously making an imprecise and ugly conversation and just more slurs to fling back and forth, but it also debases the terms. And so one of the things we're dealing with in the United States right now is a undeniable rise in rhetoric pushing for actual fascism
Yeah.
as a response to woke, a reaction to the Marxist woke model or cultural Marxist woke model. There's this cultural fascist model rising or nationalist model rising that's sometimes the purveyors are openly fascist, but the word fascist has been debased because you call everybody a fascist, so nobody's a fascist.
Yeah.
And so actual fascists are hiding under the cover. And this can cut both ways. You start calling people who have nothing to do with woke, if you say that they're woke, all of a sudden the word doesn't have as accurate and precise as a meaning anymore, and people can hide behind that to do their agendas.
It just a different way of saying I don't like you or your opinions. I'll call you woke or fascist, depending on which particular flavor of political ice cream I happen to be on, you know?
Yeah, that's why I've been striving here throughout New Zealand and my talks elsewhere in the world, including all over the United States, to be very precise with my audience and in my podcasts and my writing, to be very precise as to what woke means, where it came from, how it thinks, so that we aren't over-diagnosing and we're not over-prescribing, penicillin that won't get taken and get
Yeah.
us some kind of a super bug, so to speak. I think it's very important to go around and educate people to understand these concepts accurately, to apply them accurately because what is woke is genuinely a problem,
Yeah.
and it can only be solved by being accurate as to what we're trying to fix.
When you say it's a problem, I mean, you're a guest here from the Free Speech Union. Some people might say, well, this is just another opinion. This is just another ideology. Surely people should have the freedom to express that. But from your perspective, this is not just another opinion. This is dangerous to our society. Why do you think that?
Well, it's dangerous because it's Marxism. It's designed to create the conflict in order that a certain ideological group can center itself in the power that can be claimed from using that tool. In other words, they're trying to create a power vacuum in the existing political structure that they then occupy themselves. Karl Marx was about this. He says that in order to understand the world, this is the Communist Manifesto in a nutshell. He says, in order to understand the world, you have this division between the oppressor, the bourgeois class, and the oppressed, the proletariat.
Yep.
And the proletariat have to awaken to this conflict and get involved and fight back. And that's chapter one. And then chapter two, he says, and the necessary and correct leader for the proletariat will be the Communist Party. So now it's the party that he's personally in charge of that's going to lead everything as this revolution proceeds in the name of the workers. And so it is dangerous for that reason, but that's no reason to say that people shouldn't be able to hold these views or that they shouldn't be able to express these views, share these views, push these views, argue for these views. In fact, I think it's very important that we do. Communism has been most successful when people don't realize that they're facing communism.
Yeah.
It's secret and underground. I would rather have these bad ideas brought into the sunlight. But again, my job, as I see it, is to educate people on what I mean, obviously the other side or the woke side is bringing their ideas into the public square, and I'm trying to go around and offer, if you want to buy this or not is up to you.
Yep.
That's your freedom,
Hmm.
but you should know what you're buying. So whether it's DEI or whatever the other program is, I know that you guys have a huge issue that's kind of come up through the woke vein with the Maori people
Hmm.
in New Zealand that, from what I keep hearing, wasn't as significant 20 years ago
Yep.
in certain ways. Well, okay, so in my talks here, I've tried to express how the Soviet Union had a similar program that had similar results with similar structure, and then what we call DEI in the US and throughout the rest of the world is actually based on that program, provably based on that program. So if you want to buy a Soviet program for organizing your society and agitating your ethnic minorities, that's, I guess, your business, but you should know what it is. It's not this flowery corporate, marketing, I don't know, consulting language stuff to help you have a happier civil rights environment in your workspace that seems to backfire everywhere it gets applied.
Something which, of course, is a bit of a tenet of woke ideology is this concept of cancelling people that don't fit the mold. And the challenge of that is there are some things that we can't have conversations about. I mean, you mentioned, different races, and hey, people get shut down very quickly if they have a different opinion because they're racist, or if people have a different view about gender ideology, they get shut down very quickly because they're transphobe or homophobe. Talk to us about that, the shutting down of conversations, or the areas of society that are off limits in terms of having robust conversations.
Yeah, that's never a healthy sign that a movement is giving you. That's what we would call a red flag. If a movement's going around and saying, people who want to talk about these issues, maybe some of which are based in, empirical evidence, whether it's interpreted correctly or not, people want to be able to put forth hypotheses, debate those hypotheses in public. And if we want to be able to find out what's true and make our decisions according to that, including taking into account ethics and morals and other domains than just raw empiricism. It doesn't have to be this closed door thing. Then we have to allow for this open debate. So it's always a red flag when people say, "Well, you can't make that argument because here's this moral overtone that it has.
Yep.
This technique to me was my research has it was refined under Mao in China and was imported by the critical theorists, particularly Herbert Marcuse, also the educator Paulo Freire in Brazil. Paulo Freire said he based his educational model off of the education model used in the Cultural Revolution in Mao's China, which he was highly favorable to.
Yep.
So again, explicitly says that that's where it came from. And this model was that what Mao Zedong believed was that there were the people who agreed with his program on socialism and the building of socialism for the future of the People's Republic of China, and they were considered the people. And everybody who didn't agree was considered, in his words, the enemies of the people.
Yep.
And in this famous speech he gave in 1957, which would justify silencing people against his political project if you believed it, he said, to not have a correct political orientation is like not having a soul.
Wow.
So it's a dehumanizing view when you say that that somebody can't express an unpopular or even an ugly view, which could be brought out and exposed. Bring it out into the sunlight and expose it rather than and just stamp it and close it down. But this is the tactic of a totalitarian movement. It is not the tactic to censor and silence of one that's open-ended and interested in seeing what the actual truth is.
One of the sticky points for people in this one is there seems to be the argument for compassion. That this is a movement which is wanting to uplift minorities who are disadvantaged in some way, that offering equal opportunities for all people to participate in society. If you look at it at face value, you could see, well, there are the good ethical principles behind this, but is this a bit of a smokescreen from what you're saying?
Yeah, so I was in South Korea. I got to speak in South Korea a few months ago, for example, and they gave me a very nice bottle of alcohol when I arrived in my hotel room. It's called soju, or sochu, I guess in Korean, and it's very
Mm.
nice. This was a very nice bottle of it, small bottle, and it said the tagline, their branding name. It says it's not perfect, it's just the best. That's how they branded their liquor, and I thought that's really funny. And I
That's
think
good.
about that now. What we call that is marketing, right? Is it the best? I mean, that's a matter of taste, maybe. Or, in fact, I looked up how much the bottle costs, and I'm willing to bet that it is not the best
Yeah.
based on its price, that there might be better out there. But their branding is it's not perfect, it's just the best.
Hmm.
Well, this is the same thing. Marxists, whether they claim to be on the side of the people, as Mao Zedong did, whether they claim to be on the side of the worker, as Marx and Lenin and Stalin did, or whether they claim to be on the side of racial minorities, sexual minorities, and so on, or indigenous peoples, as we see with this cultural Marxism and woke, are giving you a sales pitch. In fact, what they're doing is using those populations. They are not uplifting those populations. They are using those populations as an opportunity to center themselves into power. How can you tell that this is happening? Well, look at a recent statistic that came out in the United States, plus or minus a few percent. Forgive me not having it in front of me, but something like they're looking into the DEI coordinators, and 75% plus or minus a few are white. Now, what does that tell you? That
Yeah.
it's not really about race, it's about ideological conformity. And what's happening is the people that are getting the power to order how people are going to live have nothing to do with the thing that they say it's actually about. Take another quote from one of our least favorite congresswomen in the United States, Ayanna Pressley. She came out after the George Floyd incident and in those tumultuous months in 2020 and said, we don't want any more black faces who don't want to be black voices, and we don't want any more brown faces who don't want to be brown voices.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means it's not actually about race. It's about agreeing with their position. So if you happen to be a black face, I suppose, or a brown face, I'm sorry, and you disagree, if you are a Maori face and you disagree, I talked to a lady last night who said that she gets called the wrong kind of Maori,
Wow.
right? So if
Yep.
you're the wrong kind of fill in the blank gay, it doesn't matter. And you're that because you speak against the ideology. What you know is that the people pushing that ideology are using you. They're not interested in your experience, they're not interested in your voice. And when it comes to who's getting the grift, they're not interested in lifting you up either. They're
Mm.
interested in lifting up their comrades. who are 75% white in the DEI racket in the United States, for example.
Yeah.
So it's a fraud. It's using these minority groups, using their troubles, agitating their anger in line with what Lenin called agitation and propaganda, and getting them to do the dirty work so that they can take, so that these ideological political operators can take power and operate in their name, using them effectively as, not in the physical sense, but as human shields.
Mm. Now, of course, in the United States, you've had a regime change and a significant cultural change that has gone with that. And some people say this is a pushback in part to woke ideology in the mainstream grassroots voters in the United States. Is there a danger, though, because we're talking about this beforehand with the extremes, is there a danger of a pendulum swing? Of too much change happening too quickly and actually ending up, yes, in a different place than we were beforehand, but perhaps potentially just as dangerous a place?
I'm less worried about too much change happening too quickly and more worried about deliberately the wrong kind of change being enacted or invited to be undertaken. We're having this war in the US right now. The term, partly that I'm here in New Zealand to talk about, woke right, has kind of splashed all over everything. And is there it's not just a pendulum swing. Is this an outright, movement and or operation to get conservatives to step into white identity politics, into anti-Semitism,
Yep.
into pro-patriarchy manosphere, as they call it on the internet,
Mm.
masculinity, which is this very toxic kind of, literally, not in the way the feminists use the word, but it is very toxic form of, I mean, for example, Andrew Tate is very highly elevated and he's very popular with young people. I hear even down here in New
Yep.
Zealand, and it's very concerning. So I think that some of that is an organic movement of reacting to that frustration. Reactionary movements are a thing. When you have this kind of a, very frustrating last for the United States last 8 to 10 years. But on the other hand, this is a perfect opportunity for all of those bad actors to step in. If I were a left-wing Democratic Party operative who sees what's going on, I wouldn't hesitate to try to pretend to be a very radical conservative now and pull people into racism or whatever else or anti-Semitism. And I think that's happening. If I were a hostile foreign government like Russia looking to seek to put division in MAGA, I would push those kinds of narratives because some people will say yes and some people will say no. If I were China with my $16 billion budget, I would exploit that. And we could go down the whole list of hostile people. The Qataris are currently
Yep.
under scrutiny in the United States for funding a lot of not just the Palestinian stuff, but also anti-Semitism and anti-Israel narratives in MAGA, which have kind of caught on. So there's a fear for me, not of the pendulum kind of swinging on its own, or not, and again, not just doing too much too fast, but rather being seduced into taking deliberately wrong steps.
Yep.
And actually, that's specifically what the Free Speech Union brought me down to talk in New Zealand about. And I've talked about now 4 lectures in 3 of your cities.
How do we get the balance right then? I suppose of wanting to move forward, of challenging where we need to challenge, but not being reactionary. How do we be the version of ourselves that are in relationship with other people with different opinions, and not just the ranty guy on Twitter?
Yeah, so it's difficult. And especially because Twitter is ever present now, And so in Taronga, when I spoke the other night, I said that I gave kind of a similar question was asked, and I talked about the need to articulate timeless principles of, what it means to live in a free society, for example. That's, I think, one ingredient. We have to talk about that. But the speech, I know that this will come out after I've spoken here in Christchurch, but the speech I plan to give tonight, which I have not yet given here in Christchurch, I want to talk about that the solution has to be. I'm looking at Sun Tzu, as it gets pronounced, who wrote The Art of War, this
Yeah.
Chinese military strategist from antiquity. And he wrote that, you have to know your enemy and you have to know yourself. He said, in fact, that if you know yourself and your enemy, you don't need to fear entering any battle. If you don't know only yourself but not your enemy, for every one you win, you'll lose. And he said, if you know neither your enemy nor yourself, then you'll lose every battle.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about, I think the solution is we have to know our enemy. How are we being provoked? Where is it coming from? Is it funded by bad actors? Is it organic? What are the ideas? What is the truth about it? For example, that DEI traces back to Russian Korinitsatsia that was used in the Soviet Union is an important thing to know as to whether or not we want to implement it. How do we know our enemy? And then on the other hand, who are we as a people?
Hmm.
I think that if we use kind of the term that Elon Musk likes so much, the woke mind virus, it
Yeah.
kind of entered in specifically because the immune system was weak enough to let it go, just to stick with the metaphor.
Yeah.
And that immune system, knowing what our fundamental principles are as free people and knowing why they matter. We've been comfortable, we've been rich, we've been prosperous for a long time, and we've not felt the need to articulate those, I think, the same way that maybe we would have, especially what we call in the US, Spirit of 76, the cause of liberty. And I think we've got to reinvigorate knowing who we are as free people. So it'll be different for me as an American and different for you as a Kiwi, but we have something deeply in common in every free nation. And I think that we've got to look into that. So that's I think the key message to getting out of this is we have to know our enemy so that they can't beat us and can't provoke us.
Yeah.
But we also have to know ourselves so that we know who we are and what we're shooting for. If you don't know where the Southern Cross is, you're not going to find the South Pole.
Yeah. No, totally. And interesting and perhaps ironic that both the problem and the solution have its heart in mainland China. With different philosophies from different centuries there. Dr. Lindsay, very much appreciate this chat. Some challenging topics for both of our nations to wrestle with in terms of finding our identity in the future that we want to create for ourselves and for our communities. Thank you for your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.